Welcome to Sleepless Ancient Odyssey. The day is done. It is time now to let the noise of your world fade into silence. Find your most comfortable position, and for the next few moments, simply relax. Tonight's Odyssey is about to begin. Tonight, we journey to the desert necropolis of ancient Egypt beneath the sands of Saqqara. You will witness the discovery of colossal stone boxes hidden in eternal darkness. You will walk among the engineers who carved granite with impossible precision, and you will discover a mystery that has confounded archaeologists for over a century and a half. This is not merely history. This is a testament to human capability so extraordinary that it challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world. Whether you are here for a story to captivate your mind or a grand narrative to accompany you to sleep, your journey starts now. If you enjoy these odysseys, subscribe and join us every time we travel to the past. Now, let us begin. The desert remembers everything and reveals nothing. For thousands of years, the sand dunes of Saqqara have shifted and settled, concealing beneath their weight the remnants of civilizations that rose and fell like the Nile itself. This is a landscape of memory-made stone. Step pyramids climb toward the sky, their ancient limestone blocks weathered by wind and time. Tombs burrow deep into the earth, their passageways cool and dark as the void between stars. It is November 1850. The air carries the peculiar stillness that comes just before discovery, though no one walking these sands could know it yet. In the shadow of the step pyramid of Djoser, the oldest stone monument in the world, a French archaeologist named Auguste Mariette stands contemplating the desert floor. He has come to Egypt not for this. He has come to acquire Coptic manuscripts for the Louvre, a mission of preservation and scholarship. But the desert has other plans. Mariette notices something peculiar. Protruding from the sand, barely visible, is the head of a sphinx. It is limestone, eroded but unmistakable. And then he sees another, and another. They form a line, these silent guardians, their leonine bodies buried, their human faces gazing towards some invisible destination. Mariette knows what this means. In ancient Egypt, sphinxes marked sacred pathways. They stood sentinel along processional routes leading to temples, to tombs, to places of profound importance. He begins to dig. The work is slow, methodical. Sand gives way to stone. The avenue of sphinxes emerges, one after another, a ghostly procession frozen in time. They lead somewhere. They must. Mariette follows their gaze, directing his workers to clear the path ahead. Days become weeks. The desert yields grudgingly, handful by handful. And then, suddenly, the sphinxes terminate at a massive entrance carved into the living rock. The stone doorway is impressive, adorned with hieroglyphs worn smooth by millennia. It beckons, it warns. Mariette stands at the threshold of something ancient, something that has waited in darkness since the time of the pharaohs. The entrance is partially blocked, filled with debris and sand that has filtered down through countless seasons. But there is a way forward. There is always a way forward for those who are willing to descend into the earth, into the realm of shadows and forgotten things. The workers clear the entrance. They light torches. The flames cast dancing shadows on the corridor walls as the first humans in perhaps 2,000 years step into the darkness beyond. The air is stale, thick with the dust of ages. The corridor slopes downward, descending at a gentle angle into the bedrock beneath Saqqara. Mariette moves forward, his torch held high, his heart pounding with anticipation. What he discovers will change his life. It will change our understanding of ancient Egypt. But in 1850, in that first moment of revelation, he simply stops and stares. The corridor opens into a vast underground complex. Galleries branch off in multiple directions, carved with geometric precision from the native limestone. The ceilings are high, vaulted, supported by the rock itself. The passages stretch away into darkness, their ends invisible. This is not a tomb, This is not a temple. This is something else entirely. The walls are lined with alcoves, niches carved at regular intervals, each one a doorway into a deeper chamber. Mariette enters the first of these chambers. His torch illuminates something impossible. A box, a sarcophagus, but unlike any he has ever seen. It is massive, hewn from a single block of black granite. The stone is polished to a mirror finish, even after millennia. The box is rectangular, perfect in its proportions, with walls several feet thick. It sits on the chamber floor, immovable, eternal. Mariette approaches slowly. He runs his hand along the surface. It is smooth as glass, cold as death. The lid rests atop the box, also carved from solid granite, fitting with such precision that no light penetrates the seam. He moves to the next chamber. Another box. This one is the same. Perfect, massive, silent. Chamber after chamber reveals the same sight. These colossal sarcophagi line the galleries, each one identical in craftsmanship if not in dimension. Some are larger than others, but all share the same characteristics. All are carved from single blocks of the hardest stone. All are polished to perfection. All are sealed. Mariette counts them. 24 boxes in total, spread throughout the underground labyrinth. He has found the Serapeum, the burial place of the sacred Apis bulls. These animals were worshipped in ancient Egypt as manifestations of the god Ptah, creator of the world, patron of craftsmen. When an Apis bull died, it was mummified and interred with ceremonies befitting a pharaoh. The Serapeum was their eternal resting place. But standing before these titanic granite boxes, Mariette cannot shake a feeling of profound unease. These are not mere tombs. The precision is too exact. The scale is too grand. The effort required to create them is too extraordinary. Each box weighs an estimated 70 tons. Some weigh closer to 100. They are carved from single blocks of granite quarried 500 miles away in Aswan. They have been transported across the desert, lowered into this underground complex, and positioned with millimetric accuracy in chambers barely larger than the boxes themselves. How? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Mariette makes careful notes. He sketches the layout of the galleries. He measures the boxes as best he can with the tools available. And then he does what any archaeologist would do. He opens one. The lid is heavy beyond comprehension, but with enough men and enough leverage, it can be moved. The stone grinds against stone, a sound like the earth itself groaning. The lid shifts. The seal breaks. 2,000 years of darkness spill out. Mariette peers inside. The box contains the mummified remains of a bull wrapped in linen, adorned with sacred amulets. There are offerings placed beside the body, jars of oil, vessels of grain, objects meant to sustain the animal in the afterlife. It is a burial, sacred and solemn. But the box itself, the container that holds these remains, speaks of something beyond religious devotion. It speaks of a civilization that commanded stone as though it were clay, that shaped granite with tools we can barely imagine, that pursued perfection as an act of faith. Mariette will spend years studying the Serapeum. He will excavate the galleries, catalogue the findings, and write extensively about what he has discovered. But even he, in all his scholarship, will never fully answer the central question. Why this? Why boxes of such impossible precision, such staggering weight, for the burial of animals? What knowledge did they possess? What techniques have been lost to time? The desert keeps its secrets, but now at least we know where to look. To understand the Serapeum, we must first understand the Apis bull. In ancient Egypt, certain animals were not merely animals. They were vessels. They were living embodiments of the divine, chosen by the gods themselves to walk among mortals. The Apis bull was the most sacred of these incarnations, a creature of black hide, marked with specific white patterns that identified it as holy from the moment of its birth. The city of Memphis, capital of Egypt for nearly 3,000 years, was the home of the Apis cult. Here, in the shadow of the great pyramids of Giza, in the bustling heart of a civilization that ruled the known world, the Apis bull lived as a god made flesh. It resided in a temple complex of extraordinary beauty, attended by priests who tended to its every need. The bull was fed the finest grain, offered the purest water, adorned with jewels and gold. When it walked the streets of Memphis, crowds gathered. People brought offerings. They sought blessings. They wept at the sight of divinity passing before their eyes. The Apis bull was believed to be the living soul of Ptah, the creator god. Ptah was the architect of the universe, the deity who spoke the world into existence, who shaped the cosmos with his words and his will. As the patron of craftsmen, builders, and artisans, Ptah represented the transformative power of human creativity. To house his earthly manifestation, the Egyptians built temples of white limestone and gold. To honor his passing, they created monuments that would last forever. When an Apis bull died, Egypt mourned. The death of the sacred animal was a national catastrophe, a moment when the divine presence withdrew from the world. The bull's body was mummified with the same care given to pharaohs. Priests performed elaborate rituals, reciting prayers that would guide the bull's spirit to the afterlife. The process took 70 days, the same duration required for royal mummification. Every organ was preserved, every ceremony was performed with exacting precision. And then came the burial. This was not a simple interment. This was a cosmic event. The mummified bull was transported to Saqqara, to the Serapeum, to the labyrinth that waited beneath the sand. Processions wound through the desert, accompanied by chanting priests and mourning crowds. The bull was carried on a sledge, draped in linen and gold, surrounded by offerings and sacred objects. At the entrance to the Serapeum, the final rites were performed, and then the bull was lowered into the darkness, into the waiting embrace of the granite sarcophagus. The tradition began in the New Kingdom around 1550 BCE, perhaps earlier. It continued for over 1,000 years, through dynasties and kingdoms, through conquests and collapses. Each Apis bull was interred in its own massive stone box, joining the others in the eternal silence of the galleries. By the time the practice ended in the Ptolemaic period, 24 bulls rested in the Serapeum, each one a testament to faith that transcended death. But here is where the story becomes strange. The earliest sarcophagi in the Serapeum are made of limestone, carved with hieroglyphs that identify the bull buried within and the pharaoh who reigned when it died. These boxes, while impressive, are within the bounds of what we might expect from ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. They are ornate, they are symbolic, they are comprehensible. The granite boxes are not. The 24 granite sarcophagi display a level of precision that borders on the impossible. They are carved from single blocks of Aswan granite, one of the hardest stones on earth. The interior dimensions are perfectly uniform, the walls meeting at exact 90-degree angles. The surfaces are polished to a degree that requires modern machinery to replicate. The lids weigh between 15 and 30 tons each, yet they fit their bases with such accuracy that a sheet of paper can barely be inserted between them. Consider the logistics. Aswan lies 500 miles south of Saqqara, 500 miles up the Nile through a landscape of desert and rock. Quarrying a 100-ton block of granite from the living stone is a feat in itself. Transporting it to the river, loading it onto a barge, navigating the currents and the cataracts, and then moving it overland to Saqqara represents a monumental expenditure of resources, time, and human effort. And then, somehow, they lowered these boxes into the Serapeum. The corridors are narrow, the turns sharp, the chambers barely large enough to accommodate the sarcophagi. There are no marks on the walls, no evidence of damage from the process. The boxes simply appear in their alcoves, positioned with millimetric precision, as though they materialized from the stone itself. Modern engineers struggle to explain it. Using contemporary technology, moving objects of this weight and size through such confined spaces would require hydraulic lifts, cranes, and precision equipment. The ancient Egyptians had none of these things. They had copper tools, wooden levers, rope, and human labor. They had ingenuity and determination, and somehow, impossibly, they succeeded. The priests who supervised the burials left no detailed records of their techniques. The craftsmen who carved the boxes did not inscribe their methods on the walls. The knowledge was either too sacred to share or too obvious to warrant explanation. Or perhaps, and this is the troubling thought, it was knowledge that was already ancient when the Serapeum was created, knowledge inherited from a time we have yet to understand. The Apis bulls are long gone. Their mummified remains crumbled or were lost in the centuries after Mariette's discovery. But the boxes remain. They sit in the darkness beneath Saqqara, silent and immovable, a challenge carved in stone. They ask a question that echoes across 4,000 years. How did you do this? And we, with all our modern knowledge, all our technological sophistication, have no answer that satisfies. Imagine you are an engineer. You have been tasked with replicating one of the Serapeum sarcophagi using only the tools available to the ancient Egyptians. You stand in the quarry at Aswan, surrounded by granite outcroppings that have existed since the birth of the earth. Your tools are copper chisels, wooden mallets, sand, and stone pounders. You have unlimited human labor, unlimited time, and the collective knowledge of the most advanced civilization of the ancient world. Now, carve a box. The task seems straightforward until you begin to calculate the realities. The granite you are working with is one of the hardest stones on earth, measuring between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper, the primary metal available to ancient Egyptians, measures only 3. Copper cannot cut granite. It cannot even scratch it. Every experiment conducted by modern archaeologists attempting to work granite with copper tools ends the same way. The copper deforms, the granite remains unmarked. So the ancient Egyptians used a different method. They employed stone pounders, balls of dolerite or other hard stone, which they used to pulverize the granite surface through repeated percussion. Hour after hour, day after day, workers would hammer the granite, crushing it grain by grain, slowly excavating the shape they desired. For a simple statue or obelisk, this method is plausible, if extraordinarily time-consuming. But the Serapeum sarcophagi are not simple. They are hollow boxes with walls several feet thick, carved from single blocks weighing up to 100 tons. The interior must be excavated without cracking the outer shell. The walls must remain uniform in thickness. The angles must be precise. One mistake, one crack propagating through the stone, and months or years of work are lost. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that this is possible. The ancient craftsmen had patience beyond modern comprehension. They had expertise passed down through generations. They knew the stone, understood its grain, could predict how it would fracture under stress. So they carved the box, they hollow out the interior, they shape the exterior, they create the lid. Now comes the polishing. The surfaces of the Serapeum sarcophagi are not merely smooth. They are polished to a reflective finish, flat to within thousandths of an inch, across spans of several feet. Modern stone masons achieve this using diamond-tipped tools, precision grinding machines, and laser measurement systems. The ancient Egyptians used sand and patience. They would have employed progressively finer abrasives, rubbing the stone with wet sand until the scratches from the previous grit were erased. This process, repeated across the entire surface of a multi-ton block, would take months, perhaps years, and it would require a level of flatness control that seems impossible without modern measurement tools. yet the boxes are flat. Measurements taken by researchers using laser levels confirm that the interior surfaces of some sarcophagi deviate from true flatness by no more than 0.02 of an inch across their entire length. This is precision manufacturing. This is not the work of artists creating a symbolic tomb. This is the work of engineers pursuing perfection for its own sake. And we have not yet addressed the fundamental question: why? If the purpose of the sarcophagi was to house the mummified remains of sacred bulls, why pursue such extraordinary precision? A rough-hewn stone box would serve the same religious function. The bulls would rest just as peacefully in limestone as in polished granite. The priests would perform the same rituals. The gods would receive the same offerings, unless the precision itself was the point, unless the act of creating something perfect was an offering in its own right, a demonstration of human capability elevated to the level of worship. In some cases, the clearance between the box and the wall is measured in inches. The debate continues, passionate and unresolved, with evidence marshaled on both sides and certainty elusive as desert sand. What cannot be debated is the effect of standing in those galleries. There is a presence in the Serapeum, a weight that has nothing to do with granite and everything to do with human effort sustained across centuries. These passages were carved by people who believed they were creating something eternal. They were building a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Every blow of the hammer, every grain of stone removed, was an act of faith made physical. The tourists who visit Saqqara today can descend into the Serapeum, following the same path Mariette walked in 1850. The sarcophagi remain where he found them, immovable, eternal. Lights now illuminate the galleries, replacing torches and oil lamps. Signs provide context, explaining the history and purpose of the site. But no amount of electric lighting, no informative placard, can fully dispel the profound strangeness of this place. You stand before a granite box that weighs 70 tons. You place your hand on its surface, feeling the cold stone, the impossible smoothness. You try to imagine the effort required to create this. You try to conceive of the knowledge necessary to achieve this level of precision. And you realize that you cannot. The gulf between our world and theirs is too vast, bridged only by these mute stone witnesses that refuse to explain themselves. The labyrinth of time runs both ways. We look back at them, trying to understand who they were, what they knew, how they achieved the impossible. And perhaps, in some way that transcends rational thought, they are looking forward at us, wondering if we will ever be worthy of the legacy they left carved in the eternal stone of the Serapeum. Let us speak plainly about what we know and what we do not. In the study of ancient history, certainty is a rare commodity, earned through careful excavation of evidence, meticulous analysis of artifacts, and rigorous debate among scholars who dedicate their lives to understanding the past. The Serapeum presents us with physical evidence that we can measure, photograph, and study. It also presents us with an absence, a void where explanation should be, and into that void flow theories both mainstream and fringe, each attempting to fill the silence left by the ancient craftsman. The conventional archaeological narrative proceeds as follows. The Serapeum was created during Egypt's dynastic period, primarily the New Kingdom and later. The granite sarcophagi were quarried at Aswan, using techniques consistent with ancient Egyptian stoneworking. They were transported via the Nile on specially constructed barges during the annual flood, when water levels were high enough to support such massive loads. Upon reaching Saqqara, the boxes were moved overland using sledges and rollers, with the path potentially lubricated with water or milk to reduce friction. And the lids set in place using wooden levers and human labor, numbering in the hundreds or thousands. This explanation is based on evidence from other large-scale Egyptian construction projects. We know the Egyptians moved massive stone blocks for the pyramids, for obelisks, for colossal statues. We have paintings and reliefs showing teams of workers hauling stone. We have quarry marks indicating how blocks were extracted. We have mathematical papyri suggesting they understood leverage and force multiplication. If they could build the Great Pyramid, the reasoning goes, they could certainly create and position the Serapeum sarcophagi. But the pyramid builders left evidence of their methods. At the Giza Plateau, we can see the ramps, the tool marks, the infrastructure of construction. The workers' villages have been excavated, revealing where the laborers lived, what they ate, how they were organized. The pyramids themselves bear witness to the incremental process of their creation, with each course of stone providing a new level from which to lift the next. The entire process, while impressive, is comprehensible, difficult certainly, requiring organization and resources on a scale rarely matched in human history. The Serapeum is different. The confined spaces, the precision, the polish, the weight, all combine to create a challenge that seems qualitatively distinct from other ancient Egyptian achievements. The flatness of the interior surfaces, the perpendicularity of the walls, the parallelism of opposing faces, all exhibit tolerances that he argues are consistent with modern machine work. Dunn suggests that the boxes were created using some form of precision tooling, possibly powered machinery that leaves signatures in the stone similar to those produced by contemporary cutting and grinding equipment. Other researchers have focused on the logistics. Uncharted X, a channel dedicated to exploring ancient mysteries, has documented the Serapeum extensively, measuring the corridors, examining the chambers, they suggest that ancient cultures may have achieved specific, highly specialized capabilities that were later lost, leaving behind artifacts we can observe but not fully explain. They argue that our assumptions about what ancient people could and could not do may be limited by our own biases, our tendency to project our methods backward in time and assume that if we would struggle to accomplish something, so too would they. The debate is more than academic. It touches on fundamental questions about human ingenuity, cultural memory, and the nature of knowledge itself. How much do we really understand about the capabilities of our ancestors? How much evidence would it take to revise our established historical narratives? At what point does skepticism of extraordinary claims become dogmatism, a refusal to consider possibilities that challenge comfortable certainties? The Serapeum refuses to provide easy answers. The boxes sit in their chambers, precisely positioned, perfectly polished, maddeningly silent. They do not explain themselves. They simply exist, a challenge carved in granite, daring us to explain them using only the tools and knowledge we assume the ancient Egyptians possessed. And here is where we must acknowledge the limits of our certainty. We cannot prove, beyond all doubt, exactly how the sarcophagi were created and positioned. We can infer, we can hypothesize, we can point to other achievements and say, if they did this, they could do that. And a half after Mariette's discovery suggests that the Serapeum guards its secrets still. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians would be amused by our confusion. Perhaps they would see our inability to replicate their work as evidence that we have lost something essential, some understanding of stone and force and precision that they took for granted. or perhaps they would be puzzled by our insistence on explanations, on reducing their achievements to lists of tools and techniques. Maybe the boxes were never meant to be understood. Maybe they were meant to be experienced, to inspire awe and wonder, to remind all who stood before them that human capability, when joined to faith and determination, can achieve the impossible. We stand at the intersection of evidence and mystery, of what can be measured and what must be imagined. The Serapeum invites us to question, to explore, to refuse the comfort of easy answers. And in that invitation, perhaps, lies its greatest gift. Not certainty, but wonder. Not explanation, but the recognition that the past is deeper, stranger, and more magnificent than we can fully comprehend. Every tool leaves a mark. This is a fundamental principle of archaeology and forensic science. When ancient craftsmen worked stone, they left behind evidence of their methods, subtle signatures that can be read by trained eyes. A copper saw produces characteristic parallel scratches. A chisel creates linear gouges. Abrasive grinding with sand leaves random, multi-directional scoring. The Serapeum sarcophagi bear marks, but they are marks that trouble those who study them most carefully. In certain locations, particularly in unfinished boxes, and in areas where the polishing process was incomplete, tool marks remain visible. Some of these marks are consistent with expected ancient Egyptian techniques. There are areas that show the pecking patterns of stone pounders, the progressive removal of material through percussion. There are regions where grinding with progressively finer abrasives has smoothed the surface in preparation for final polishing. These marks tell a story we understand, a story of patient labor extended over months or years. But there are other marks. In some locations, researchers have documented what appear to be saw marks, parallel grooves running across the stone with consistent depth and spacing. These marks suggest the use of some form of sawing tool capable of cutting granite at rates that seem impossible for copper saws, even copper saws embedded with abrasive slurry. The depth and regularity of the cuts imply a mechanical process, something that could maintain consistent pressure and motion across extended periods. William Flinders Petrie, one of the founding fathers of scientific Egyptology, studied ancient Egyptian tool marks extensively in the late 19th century. He measured saw marks on granite and diorite blocks at various sites, calculating the rate of penetration per stroke. His findings were remarkable. Some marks suggested cutting rates of 1/10 of an inch per stroke, a figure that seemed impossibly high for copper tools cutting through one of the hardest stones on earth. Petrie hypothesized the use of jewel-tipped saws, perhaps employing corundum or even diamond, but no such tools have ever been found in the archaeological record. Inside the Serapeum sarcophagi, in the corners where the internal walls meet the base, there are regions that present particular challenges for explanation. These inside corners are rounded with remarkably consistent radii, suggesting the use of some form of core drilling or rotary cutting tool. Creating such uniformly rounded internal corners using chisels or hand tools would be extraordinarily difficult, requiring exceptional control and likely leaving evidence of angular tool marks that would then need to be laboriously ground away. The consistency of these radii across multiple boxes suggests a standardized process, a technique that could be reliably repeated. Core drilling itself presents another enigma. The ancient Egyptians demonstrably possessed core drilling technology. We have found granite drill cores at various sites, hollow cylinders of stone extracted when drilling circular holes. But the characteristics of these ancient drill cores sometimes defy explanation. Some show spiral grooves on their surfaces, suggesting the drill was advancing into the stone at rates much faster than should be possible with copper tubes and sand abrasive. done has analyzed these cores and the holes they came from, noting that the groove patterns are consistent with high-speed machining. He points out that modern drill bits cutting hard materials leave similar spiral patterns, the result of the cutting tool advancing through the material at a consistent rate while rotating. To achieve this with hand-powered or even weighted copper drills using sand as an abrasive seems to require cutting rates that violate our understanding of material science. Copper is soft. Sand abrasive works slowly. The combination should produce gradual, grinding progress, not the rapid, consistent penetration suggested by the groove patterns. Mainstream archaeologists counter that these effects can be explained through techniques we simply haven't fully replicated yet. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians used specific types of sand with particularly sharp quartz grains. Perhaps they employed percussive drilling, pounding the drill as it rotated to fracture the stone rather than grind it away. Perhaps variations in the hardness of the granite itself, the presence of softer mineral inclusions, allowed for faster cutting in specific areas. The debate hinges on interpretations of physical evidence, with different researchers drawing different conclusions from the same tool marks. What cannot be disputed is the polish. The final surface finish of the Serapeum sarcophagi represents the culmination of the manufacturing process, and it is here that ancient Egyptian craftsmanship reaches its apex. The polished surfaces are not merely smooth. They are flat to extraordinary tolerances, reflective enough to show dim images and uniform across areas measuring several square feet. Achieving this requires removing all tool marks, all variations in surface height, all irregularities that would scatter light. Progressively finer abrasives are applied with rubbing motions, each grade of abrasive removing the scratches left by the previous grade. The stone is constantly wetted to wash away debris and to provide a medium for the abrasive to work. The process is slow, meditative, requiring constant attention to maintain even pressure across the surface. For small objects, this is feasible. For the interior of a box measuring 8 feet by 12 feet by 4 feet deep, carved from solid granite with walls 30 inches thick, the scale of effort becomes almost incomprehensible. Consider the simple geometry. To polish the interior surfaces of just one sarcophagus requires treating approximately 300 square feet of granite to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Every square foot must receive hours upon hours of attention, with the craftsmen constantly checking their progress, ensuring they are not creating dips or high spots, maintaining the absolute flatness that characterizes the finished product. Why? For what purpose? If the boxes were merely containers for mummified bulls, this level of finish is incomprehensible. The bulls do not require mirror smooth granite. The priests performing the ceremonies would not be able to appreciate tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The boxes would fulfill their religious function perfectly well with surfaces rough from the quarry, or at most smoothed to remove sharp edges. The pursuit of precision beyond any practical need suggests that the precision itself was the goal, that the creation of these boxes was an exercise in pushing the boundaries of what was possible, a demonstration of mastery that transcended utility and entered the realm of art. Or it suggests that the boxes were created for a different purpose, one that required hermetic sealing, flat mating surfaces, and durability beyond anything organic materials could provide. What purpose that might be remains a subject of intense speculation. Some have proposed the boxes were designed to contain something precious that required protection from moisture, air, or light. Others suggest they were created as power sources or resonant chambers, utilizing the specific acoustic properties of granite and the geometric perfection of the internal cavity. These theories venture far from mainstream archaeology into territory where physical evidence ends and imagination begins. The tool marks remain, patient and permanent, waiting to be read. They are a language we are still learning to interpret, a record written in stone by craftsmen who took their techniques to the grave. Every mark is a word in that language. Every polished surface is a sentence. And the story they tell, when we finally learn to read it completely, may revolutionize our understanding of what the ancient world achieved. Until then, we have mysteries carved in granite, questions polished to perfection, and the uncomfortable knowledge that our ancestors may have known things we have yet to rediscover. 500 miles. That is the distance from the granite quarries of Aswan to the necropolis of Saqqara. 500 miles through desert and river, heat and flood, requiring coordination, resources, and determination on a scale that taxes the imagination. To understand the Serapeum, we must understand this journey. We must visualize the transportation of 100-ton blocks of stone across the length of Egypt, a feat that remains impressive even today, with modern equipment and infrastructure. The journey begins in Aswan, in the quarries where the granite outcrops from the earth in massive formations. The stone here is ancient, formed over 1 billion years ago in the depths of the earth's crust, thrust upward by tectonic forces and then exposed by millennia of erosion. It is red granite primarily, colored by iron oxide, though black granite also appears. The quarries show the marks of ancient extraction, rectangular voids cut into the living rock, abandoned blocks still partially attached to the parent stone, evidence of techniques refined over generations. To remove a 100-ton block from the quarry requires first defining its boundaries. Workers would have used controlled fracturing, exploiting natural weaknesses in the stone, or creating their own. They would drill or pound a series of holes along the desired line of separation, then drive wooden wedges into these holes and soak them with water. The wood expands as it absorbs moisture, exerting tremendous pressure on the stone, causing it to crack along the predetermined line. This technique is patient, reliable, and visible in quarries throughout Egypt. Once freed from the parent stone, the block must be moved. Here, we enter the realm of speculation supported by limited evidence. The Egyptians understood the principles of reducing friction. They knew that stone moved more easily across wood than across sand, that water or other lubricants could further ease the effort. Paintings and reliefs from various periods show statues being moved on sledges, with teams of workers pulling ropes, while others pour liquid onto the path ahead. But these images depict objects weighing perhaps a few tons. A 100-ton block represents a qualitative difference, not merely a quantitative one. The math is unforgiving. Moving a 100-ton load across any surface requires overcoming static friction, which for stone on stone, or even stone on wood, can be substantial. Even assuming generous coefficients of friction reduced by lubrication, the force required would necessitate hundreds of workers pulling in perfect coordination. The logistics of organizing such teams, maintaining their efforts over extended periods, and coordinating their movements without mechanical communication systems represents a management challenge as significant as the physical one. But let us assume they succeeded. The block has been moved from the quarry to the Nile. Now comes the river journey. The Nile was Egypt's highway, its primary means of transporting heavy goods across distances that would be impossible to traverse by land. During the annual flood, the river swells, its waters rising and spreading across the floodplains, creating a vast transportation network where boats could venture inland with relative ease. This was the season for major transport operations, when the power of the current could be harnessed, when deep draft barges could be floated. But constructing a barge capable of carrying a 100-ton granite block is its own engineering challenge. The vessel must be large enough to provide sufficient buoyancy, stable enough to prevent capsizing, and sturdy enough to withstand the concentrated load without breaking apart. No such barges have survived, which is unsurprising given that ancient Egyptian boats were typically constructed from cedar or other woods that decay completely given sufficient time. But we can infer their characteristics from the loads they must have carried. Loading the block onto the barge would require either ramps extending into the water at loading points, or perhaps specially constructed dry docks that could be flooded once the block was positioned. The barge, once loaded, would sit low in the water, barely floating, its deck nearly awash. Controlling such a vessel in the currents of the Nile would require skill and experience, with crews using poles, oars, and possibly sails to navigate around obstacles and maintain their course. The journey upstream from Aswan to Memphis, near modern Cairo, would take weeks, possibly months, depending on conditions. The crews would need to stop regularly to rest, to repair any damage to the barge, to wait out unfavorable conditions. At the cataracts, where the river rushes through narrow channels broken by rocky outcrops, the barge would need to be carefully guided or perhaps even unloaded, and the block transported around the obstacles by land before being reloaded downstream. Upon reaching Memphis, the block would be offloaded and prepared for the final leg of its journey. Saqqara lies on the edge of the western desert, several miles from the Nile's banks. This overland journey, though short compared to the river voyage, presented its own challenges. The route would need to be prepared, perhaps with wooden rollers laid in sequence, with the sledge carrying the block moved forward from roller to roller as it advanced. Or perhaps they used a road, a prepared surface of packed earth or wooden beams strong enough to support the weight. And then, finally, the block arrives at the Serapeum. But the journey is not over. The most difficult phase remains. The block must be moved underground, down into the galleries carved beneath the desert. The conventional explanation suggests that ramps or shafts were used, with the block lowered gradually through careful application of ropes and counterweights. But no clear evidence of such ramps has been found, and the dimensions of the galleries themselves make the process seem impossibly difficult. The corridors are narrow. The chambers barely accommodate the finished sarcophagi with mere inches of clearance. If the blocks were lowered as rough-cut forms and then carved in place, this would explain the positioning, but raises the question of how workers could access the stone to work it once it was in such a confined space. The debris from carving must be removed, requiring room to work and passages to transport the waste stone. Yet the galleries show no evidence of the extensive excavation that would be necessary to provide such working space. If, alternatively, the boxes were carved to their final dimensions before being moved underground, the positioning becomes even more inexplicable. Threading a 100-ton finished granite box through passages with minimal clearance, around corners, into chambers barely larger than the box itself, all without damaging the polished surfaces or cracking the stone, seems to require capabilities bordering on the supernatural. Yet there they are, 24 granite sarcophagi, positioned with millimetric precision in their underground chambers. The transport, the positioning, the sheer logistics of the undertaking represent an achievement that we struggle to replicate even with modern machinery. And the ancient Egyptians accomplished it not once, but 24 times, over a period spanning centuries, maintaining standards of precision that never wavered. The journey of the granite from Aswan to Saqqara is a journey across the boundaries of our understanding. Every step of the process, when examined closely, presents challenges that our current reconstructions struggle to address. We can say with confidence that the ancient Egyptians moved the stone. The boxes exist, but how exactly they achieved this, what techniques they employed, what knowledge they possessed that allowed them to succeed, where modern engineers express doubt, remains shrouded in the desert sands of history. There are moments in archaeology when the evidence speaks clearly, A pottery shard bearing a dated inscription tells us when it was made. A tomb with its seals intact reveals burial practices and beliefs. A city buried by volcanic ash preserves a moment frozen in time, allowing us to reconstruct daily life with remarkable detail. And then there are moments when the evidence is silent, when artifacts refuse to yield their secrets, when the physical remains of the past pose questions that generations of scholars cannot answer. The Serapeum sarcophagi are silent. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of their mystery. The ancient Egyptians were not generally secretive about their achievements. They carved boastful inscriptions on their monuments, claiming credit for great works, praising pharaohs who commissioned projects, describing the numbers of workers employed and the resources expended. The temples are covered in hieroglyphs detailing rituals and mythologies. The tombs overflow with texts meant to guide the deceased through the afterlife. Egyptian civilization gave us some of the most detailed written records of the ancient world. But the granite boxes in the Serapeum bear almost no inscriptions. A few have cartouches, royal names that allow Egyptologists to date them to specific reigns. But most are blank, smooth, anonymous. There are no construction records, no dedicatory texts, no proud proclamations from the craftsmen who achieved the impossible. The boxes exist in a void of documentation, as though the knowledge of their creation was too sacred to inscribe, or too obvious to warrant explanation, or perhaps not Egyptian at all. This absence of information creates space for speculation. Some researchers point to the blank surfaces as evidence that the boxes predate the hieroglyphic inscriptions, that they were created by a culture that did not use written language, or at least did not use the hieroglyphic system of dynastic Egypt. If this were true, if the granite sarcophagi were inherited rather than created by the civilization we know as ancient Egypt, it would explain the silence. You do not inscribe explanations for objects whose purpose and origins you do not fully understand. Others argue that the lack of inscription is itself significant, that it indicates a different relationship between the object and its creators. In mainstream Egyptian tomb construction, the tomb is a billboard, a space for texts and images that reinforce the identity of the deceased and ensure their successful journey to the afterlife. But the granite boxes exist as pure objects, their purpose contained in their form, their meaning expressed through proportion and precision rather than words. They are minimalist in their perfection, speaking a language of geometry and craftsmanship that transcends hieroglyphs. We must acknowledge the possibility that the boxes were never meant to communicate with us. They were created for the bulls, for the gods, for purposes that did not require human explanation. The priests who conducted the ceremonies, the craftsmen who carved the stone, the pharaohs who commissioned the work, all operated within a cultural context where the meaning of the Serapeum was self-evident. To them, the boxes needed no explanation. They were what they were, perfect vessels for sacred remains, monuments to divine order made manifest in stone. But the silence extends beyond the boxes themselves. Why do we have no papyri describing their construction? Why do the walls of the Serapeum lack the detailed construction scenes found in other Egyptian monuments? Why did the Greeks and Romans, who were fascinated by Egyptian achievements and wrote extensively about pyramids and temples, barely mention the Serapeum in their surviving texts? The few classical references that exist speak of the Apis cult, of the sacred bulls worshipped in Memphis, but they do not describe the granite sarcophagi or express wonder at their precision and scale. It is as though the Serapeum existed outside the normal discourse of the ancient world, a secret hidden in plain sight, known to those who needed to know, but invisible to the curious observers who documented everything else. This selective visibility raises questions about the nature of knowledge in ancient Egypt, about what was public and what was restricted, about how information was controlled and transmitted across generations. In esoteric traditions, There is a concept of mystery schools, institutions where advanced knowledge was taught to initiates while being carefully hidden from the masses. Some researchers speculate that the construction techniques used to create the Serapeum sarcophagi were secrets of such schools, passed down through generations of craftsmen who were sworn to silence. The knowledge would be practical, not written, transmitted through demonstration and practice rather than texts. This would explain why we have no construction manuals, no technical treatises describing how to achieve the precision we observe. The knowledge was embodied in people, and when those people died without passing on their techniques, the knowledge died with them. This theory is romantic, but difficult to prove. We have no evidence of such mystery schools, at least not in the form of buildings or institutions that can be archaeologically verified. We have craft guilds, certainly, groups of specialists who controlled knowledge related to their professions. Stonemasons, carpenters, metal workers, all would have had techniques and secrets they guarded. But the leap from guild secrets to hidden schools of advanced technical knowledge is substantial, requiring evidence that remains elusive. The silence of the Serapeum sarcophagi also invites us to consider what else might be silent, what other achievements of the ancient world we might be overlooking, because they do not conform to our expectations. We search for texts, for inscriptions, for written evidence that confirms our theories. But what if some knowledge was never written? What if some achievements were considered too sacred or too dangerous to document? What if the most advanced capabilities of ancient cultures were precisely those things they chose not to explain, preserving them through practice while denying written records to those who might misuse the knowledge? In the end, the silence becomes part of the mystery, an element as integral to the Serapeum as the stone itself. The boxes do not explain themselves. They simply exist, challenging us to understand them, using only the evidence of our eyes and the tools of our analysis. They are a test, perhaps, of our willingness to accept that the past may contain capabilities we have not rediscovered, knowledge that was achieved and then lost, leaving behind only its impossible products as evidence that it once existed. We stand in the galleries, surrounded by silence. The stones do not speak. The walls hold no answers. And in that profound quiet, we are left with wonder, with questions, and with the humbling recognition that some mysteries may resist solution, that some achievements of the past may remain forever, just beyond the reach of our understanding. The Serapeum does not belong solely to the past. It exists in the present, a tourist destination, an archaeological site, a place where modern pilgrims come to stand before the ancient mystery and draw their own conclusions. The experience of visiting the Serapeum has become part of its story, adding new layers of meaning to the stone boxes that have waited in darkness for millennia. Today, visitors descend the same entrance Mariette cleared in 1850. Though the path is now lit with electric lights, marked with signs in multiple languages, regulated by the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, the romantic adventure of archaeological discovery has given way to the organized efficiency of heritage management. You purchase a ticket, perhaps hire a guide, and join a stream of tourists from every corner of the globe, all drawn by the same irresistible question: how? The galleries have been made safe for visitors. Railings prevent too close approaches to the sarcophagi. Lighting illuminates the spaces in ways torches never could, revealing details while simultaneously removing some of the atmospheric mystery that made Mariette's first descent so profound. Photography is allowed, and the boxes have been photographed millions of times from every conceivable angle, their images shared across social media, analyzed in forums, debated in comment sections by people who have never stood before them in person. Yet, despite this accessibility, despite the electric lights and the crowds and the selfies taken with granite boxes as backdrops, the Serapeum retains its power. There is something about physical presence, about standing in that space with those objects, that photographs cannot capture. The scale becomes real. The precision becomes tangible. You can place your hand on the polished surface, feel the cold smoothness, marvel at the reflection of your own face in stone that was carved thousands of years before you were born. Many visitors arrive with preconceptions, influenced by the debates that rage online about the Serapeum's origins and purpose. Some come expecting to find evidence of advanced lost civilizations, of ancient high technology, of knowledge suppressed by mainstream archaeology. Others come skeptical, armed with conventional explanations, ready to demonstrate that there is no mystery, only our lack of understanding about ancient techniques. Both groups leave with their beliefs reinforced because the Serapeum, in its silence, confirms whatever you bring to it. This phenomenon is worth examining. The boxes are neutral evidence, physical objects that exist independent of our interpretations. Yet, they generate passionate debate, with researchers and enthusiasts drawing radically different conclusions from the same observable facts. Some see impossible precision that could only be achieved with advanced technology. Others see impressive but ultimately achievable results of patient handwork. The same tool marks, the same polished surfaces, the same confined spaces, all interpreted through different frameworks that lead to opposite conclusions. Part of this divergence stems from the question of what we mean by advanced. The Serapeum sarcophagi are undeniably advanced, representing achievement at the upper limits of what ancient stoneworking could accomplish. But advanced compared to what? If we compare them to modern machine tools, they seem impossibly precise for handwork. If we compare them to other ancient Egyptian stone objects, they are exceptional, but perhaps not inexplicable. The frame of reference determines the interpretation. There is also the experiential factor. Many people who study the Serapeum from photographs and measurements come away with different impressions than those who visit in person. The photographs can be analyzed, the measurements debated, the arguments constructed in the abstract realm of data and theory. But standing in the gallery, looking at a 100-ton box that fits in its chamber with inches of clearance, trying to imagine how it got there, the visceral impact of the achievement hits differently. It is one thing to read that ancient Egyptians had organizational skills and patient labor. It is another to stand in that space and try to visualize the process. The guides who work at the Serapeum have their own relationship with the site. They tell the standard story, the approved narrative about Apis bulls and religious practices. But sometimes, when tourists ask the harder questions, when someone points to the precision or the positioning and asks how, the guides will smile and shrug. They know the official answers. They also know that the official answers do not satisfy everyone. Some guides have their own theories, developed through years of bringing visitors to the site, observing their reactions, pondering the same questions that have puzzled researchers for generations. There is a democratization of mystery happening in the modern age. The Serapeum is not hidden anymore, not the exclusive domain of archaeologists and academics. Anyone with the price of a plane ticket and entrance fee can visit. Anyone with internet access can watch videos of the site, examine photographs, read competing theories. This openness has its benefits and its drawbacks. More minds contemplating the mystery means more potential for insight, more diverse perspectives that might notice things specialists miss. But it also means more noise, more unfounded speculation, more theories built on misunderstandings or wishful thinking rather than evidence. In recent years, the Egyptian government has made efforts to preserve the Serapeum while managing the impact of tourism. The site sees thousands of visitors annually, and the simple act of breathing raises humidity levels in the underground chambers, potentially damaging the stone over time. Restrictions have been implemented, limiting access to certain areas, controlling how close visitors can approach the boxes. These measures are necessary but frustrating for those who want to examine the sarcophagi in detail, who want to make their own measurements and observations. The tension between preservation and access reflects a larger challenge in archaeology. Sites like the Serapeum are part of human heritage, belonging in some sense to all of us, but they are also fragile, requiring protection from the very interest that makes them valuable. How do we balance the desire to study, to understand, to experience these ancient achievements with the need to ensure they survive for future generations? There are no easy answers, only compromises that satisfy no one completely. But they also leave with an experience, a memory of standing in the presence of something that defies easy explanation, something that reminds us that the human story is longer and stranger than we sometimes remember. Some mysteries are meant to be solved. They are puzzles with missing pieces, waiting for new evidence to complete the picture. Other mysteries are different. They are not problems to be solved, but realities to be contemplated, phenomena that challenge our assumptions and force us to reconsider what we think we know. The Serapeum sarcophagi belong to this second category. They are a legacy of questions, each generation inheriting them from the last, adding their own observations and theories, then passing the mystery forward unsolved. What have we learned in the century and a half since Mariette's discovery? We have learned that reasonable people examining the same evidence can reach dramatically different conclusions, that the interpretation of archaeological data is not as objective as we might wish. We have learned that our assumptions about technological progression may be oversimplified, that ancient peoples may have possessed specialized knowledge that does not fit neatly into our narratives of cultural evolution. They looked at stone and saw possibilities we struggle to recognize. They commanded resources and coordinated efforts on scales we find difficult to replicate even with modern machinery. The site has become a touchstone for broader debates about ancient advanced civilizations, about the possibility of lost knowledge, about whether human history is the simple linear progression from primitive to advanced that our textbooks suggest. Mainstream scholars counter that the Serapeum, while impressive, is explicable within the framework of known ancient Egyptian capabilities, that no appeals to lost civilizations or advanced technology are necessary. They have been featured in documentaries, discussed in podcasts, analyzed in YouTube videos with millions of views. To some, they are evidence of human ingenuity and determination. To others, they are mysteries that hint at knowledge we have lost. There is power in mystery, a kind of power that solved puzzles lack. They may discover new evidence that clarifies what we find confusing, or they may simply add their own questions to the list, enriching the mystery without solving it. The boxes will wait. They have waited for thousands of years already. They can wait thousands more. It suggests that the Serapeum sarcophagi were not merely tombs, but devices, that their precision and construction served a functional purpose beyond containing mummified remains. The boxes are rectangular cavities with parallel walls, precisely dimensioned, with lids that create hermetic seals. Could the Serapeum boxes have served similar purposes, perhaps as part of initiation rituals where initiates would be sealed inside, surrounded by vibrating stone, experiencing altered states of consciousness through sound? The theory is fascinating, but difficult to prove. We have no ancient texts describing such uses. Some speculate about artifacts, scrolls, or objects of great value that were sealed in the boxes long before the bulls were added. If the granite sarcophagi predated the Apis cult's use of the Serapeum, they may have originally contained treasures or knowledge that later cultures did not understand. When the boxes were opened in antiquity, these original contents could have been removed, lost, or destroyed, leaving only the empty boxes for the priests of Memphis to repurpose. But it illustrates how the mystery of the Serapeum generates theories, how the silence of the stones creates a vacuum that speculation rushes to fill. Without written records, without clear dating, without understanding of the full historical context, we are left to infer purpose from form, to deduce function from precision, to imagine uses that fit the evidence we observe. There is also the question of consciousness and intent. Modern science recognizes that human consciousness, intention, and belief can have measurable effects on physical systems, though the mechanisms are not fully understood. Ancient cultures worldwide believed that consciousness was fundamental, that focused intention could shape reality, that rituals and ceremonies were not merely symbolic, but functionally effective. The elaborate rituals performed at the Serapeum, the chanting of priests, the offerings made to the gods, all occurred in the presence of these massive granite structures. Could the boxes have been designed to amplify, focus, or preserve these energies? Again, we enter territory where scientific method struggles. How do you test such hypotheses? How do you measure the effects of consciousness on stone? Yet the ancient Egyptians believed in such effects. They carved words of power on their monuments. They performed rituals designed to animate statues, to give life to stone through sacred speech. They treated objects as living entities that could be awakened through proper ceremonies. Perhaps the Serapeum sarcophagi were understood by their creators as more than inert stone, but as charged objects, reservoirs of power accumulated through generations of ritual use. The resonance of stone, whether acoustic or metaphysical, whether measurable or mystical, adds another dimension to the mystery. It suggests that the boxes may have served purposes we cannot easily categorize using modern terminology, that they existed at the intersection of technology and spirituality in ways that our divided worldview struggles to accommodate. We separate the practical from the sacred, the functional from the symbolic. But perhaps the ancient Egyptians did not make such distinctions. Perhaps they created objects that were simultaneously tombs and tools, containers and resonators, physical structures and spiritual machines. These theories will remain theories unless new evidence emerges. but they serve a purpose beyond explaining the Serapeum. They remind us that ancient peoples thought differently than we do, that they operated according to principles and paradigms that do not map neatly onto our scientific materialism. They challenge us to expand our thinking, to consider possibilities outside our usual frameworks, to entertain ideas that seem strange or impossible, while remaining critical and evidence-based in our evaluations. The stone resonates with mystery. Whether that resonance is acoustic, historical, or purely metaphorical, it continues to echo across the centuries, inviting each generation to listen. The story of the Serapeum does not end. It continues, each year bringing new visitors, new researchers, new perspectives on the ancient mystery. The boxes sit in their chambers, patient and permanent, waiting for the answers we seek or the questions we have not yet thought to ask. They are monuments to human capability, but also monuments to human curiosity, to our endless drive to understand what came before, to connect with ancestors separated from us by gulfs of time that dwarf individual lives. Before you rises a granite box, its surface smooth as glass, its edges sharp and true, its presence undeniable. Place your hand on the stone. Feel the cold smoothness, the slight texture that remains despite millennia. This is real. This is not myth or legend or speculation. This is stone that was quarried, transported, carved, and polished by human hands using techniques we struggle to replicate. Whatever else the Serapeum may be, it is proof that our ancestors achieved the extraordinary. The debate about how they did it will continue. New technologies may allow more precise measurements. New archaeological techniques may uncover evidence currently hidden. Or perhaps the mystery will simply persist, generation after generation inheriting the question and finding no definitive answer. Both outcomes are valuable. The first expands our knowledge, filling in gaps in our understanding of ancient capabilities. The second preserves wonder, reminding us that reality contains depths we have not plumbed, that the past holds secrets that may never fully yield to our investigations. What would the ancient craftsmen think if they could see us now, standing before their work with our laser levels and our theories, our debates, and our doubts? Would they be amused by our confusion? Would they be pleased that their achievements still inspire awe after thousands of years? Or would they be saddened that the knowledge they possessed, the techniques they mastered, have been lost so completely that we can barely conceive of how they accomplished what they did? We cannot know. The craftsmen left no messages for us beyond the work itself. The boxes are their testament, more eloquent than words, more permanent than papyrus. They say, "We were here. We did this. We commanded stone as you command your machines. We achieved precision you struggle to match. We created beauty and permanence from the hardest material we could find. Remember us." And we do remember, though imperfectly, through the veil of centuries and the fog of lost knowledge. We remember them as we stand in the Serapeum, as we run our hands over polished granite, as we marvel at the impossible positioning and wonder at the silent question that echoes through the chambers. How? Perhaps the greatest gift of the Serapeum is not the answer to that question, but the question itself. It keeps us humble. It prevents us from becoming too confident in our understanding of the past, too certain that we have mapped all of history's territories. It reminds us that there are achievements we cannot easily explain, capabilities we have not recovered, knowledge that was attained and then lost. It invites us to imagine a past that was more sophisticated, more capable, more mysterious than our textbooks suggest. As you leave the Serapeum, climbing back toward the surface, toward the light and heat of the Egyptian sun, the boxes remain below. They will be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, outlasting governments and dynasties, surviving wars and revolutions, persisting through the ages with the patience of stone. Future generations will descend those same stairs, will stand before those same boxes, will ask those same questions. The mystery will continue, refreshed by each new perspective, enriched by each new attempt to understand. And somewhere in that continuity, in that unbroken chain of wonder passing from generation to generation, we connect with the ancient craftsmen who created these impossible objects. We do not understand their methods, but we share their impulse. They wanted to create something that would last forever, that would speak across the ages, that would remind all who came after that human beings, working with stone and determination, can achieve the extraordinary. They succeeded. The Serapeum endures. The boxes wait. How? The desert does not answer. The stone remains silent, and the mystery, eternal as the granite that holds it, continues its patient wait for understanding that may come tomorrow, or in 1,000 years, or perhaps never at all. Working toward answers that may forever elude us, united by the simple, powerful, endless human need to understand. The Serapeum of Saqqara, 100-ton boxes that defy explanation, a legacy carved in granite, an eternal question written in stone, and we, the inheritors of mystery, standing at the threshold of wonder, looking back across the abyss of time at ourselves, reflected in polished stone that has waited 4,000 years for us to comprehend what it represents. The journey does not end here. It never ends. As long as stones remain and humans ask questions, the mystery endures. And in that endurance, in that permanent invitation to wonder, the Serapeum achieves its purpose, not to contain the dead, but to inspire the living, not to answer questions, but to ensure they are forever asked. Rest now. The journey through time is complete, but the question remains patient as stone, eternal as wonder, waiting in the darkness beneath Saqqara, for the next seeker to descend into the galleries and stand before the impossible and ask once more the question that has no answer and every answer: how?